The NFL is a what have you done for me lately league, and quarterbacks, especially in today's era, feel this every single Sunday. And in today's video, we will be breaking down 4 quarterbacks under the most pressure entering the 2024 season. There will be a variety of factors for each player discussed, such as where they were drafted and how they play relative to where they were drafted, or how they perform in January with the season on the line. We also live in an era where people talk about player rankings, and quite often at that, and outside of a few select quarterbacks and a few distinguishable tiers, you can make a case for about 14 or 15 quarterbacks that could be considered a top 10 player at the position. The unfortunate reality is quarterbacks, a lot of the time, are judged by wins, fair or not, and the quarterbacks in today's video have had trouble at times winning. And there are 4 quarterbacks to break down in today's video and a few honorable mentions, and without further ado, let's begin. We are starting today's video with Dolphins quarterback Tua Tagovailoa. Tua is under pressure entering the 2024 season for a lot of reasons, but there's a few big ones in particular. The Dolphins have went 19-11 over the last 2 regular seasons when Tua starts, and there have been some insanely high highs during the regular season with Tua at quarterback. The 450-plus yards, 6 passing touchdown game against the Ravens during the 2022 season immediately comes to mind, or the 309-yard, 4 touchdown game against the Broncos, in which the Dolphins put up 70 points, also comes to mind. When you look at Tua's raw numbers from the 2023 season, it's easy to believe in him moving forward or to think he is without a doubt the Dolphins franchise quarterback. He finished 5th in completion percentage and passing touchdowns in 2023, and believe it or not, he led the league in passing yards. What is particularly impressive about that for Tua is he led the league in passing yards despite finishing 9th in passing attempts. It wasn't like the Dolphins couldn't run the football and that they relied solely on Tua for the entirety of the 2023 season. Not at all. But Tua is under a lot of pressure entering the 2024 season because of how his 2023 season ended. During the first 12 games of the 2023 season, Tua threw for over 3,400 yards and 24 touchdowns and had a passer rating of 106. And for a 17-game season, he would have been on pace for 4,900 yards and 34 touchdowns. But during the final 5 games of the 2023 season, things changed, and in a big way. During the final 5 games, Tua threw for an average of 233 yards per game, which was 55 yards less per game than the 288 he was averaging in games 1 through 12. Not only that, but when you do the 17-game pace for his final 5 games, he would have been on pace for just 3,900 yards and 17 touchdowns. What is less than ideal about this, aside from the obvious, is Miami played 4 of their final 5 games at home. They didn't have to go to Seattle or San Francisco or have a 5,000 or 6,000 mile long road trip for a single game. Their lone away game during this time was in Baltimore, which is a quick 2.5 hour flight up the East Coast. They then went to Kansas City, of course, in the wild card round of the playoffs, and we all know how that game ended. Tua completed just 51% of his passes and had a passer rating of 63.9, and the Dolphins put up 7 points as a team. Now, it's cliche to say the Dolphins freeze when it gets cold because of all the beaches and warm weather South Florida gets year-round, but it's true with Tua and the Dolphins. Miami is in a tricky situation, and it's due in large part to Tua. Do they extend him and pay $200 million, or do they try and rebuild and try and trade Tua away before the bill comes due? This all plays a part as to why Tua is under an enormous amount of pressure entering the 24 season. There's a lot of narratives about Tua that you can't really defend even as a Tua fan. They played 2 games last year in their final 3 against Baltimore and Kansas City, and they put up a combined 26 points on offense. I know they had a ton of defensive starters out, including their top 2 pass rushers, but putting up 40 total points in your final 3 games when you want a $200 million contract is not ideal, and Tua needs to perform in 2024 and in a big way. Guys, we have a quick public service announcement. Do you think you've mastered the look between sweatpants and joggers and are one step away from pajamas in public? I have some news for you. It's time to get your rear end in jeans. Now, the title of today's video is Quarterbacks Under the Most Pressure Entering the 2024 Season, but there is no pressure wearing the perfect jeans. As you can see, there is plenty of flexibility within the jeans. You can see how high we can get the legs up here. I recently wore them out a couple weeks ago. This is not just me shoving a sponsor down you guys' throat saying, please buy this. They are quality jeans, and once you really try them, you will never go back to another pair of other jeans. They are that good. They come in all shapes and sizes, and you can use code ANALYSIS15 to get 15% off your first order. They're comfortable, they fit great, they look great, they have 6 size ranges from skinny to thick, and they have waist ranges from 26 to 50 inches. The perfect jean has you covered, and I cannot recommend them enough. And you can get 15% off your first order at the Perfect Jean using code ANALYSIS15. Once again, that's code ANALYSIS15, and a big thank you to the Perfect Jean for sponsoring today's video. Next up is Dak Prescott of the Dallas Cowboys. There's a ton of pressure playing quarterback for any NFL franchise in today's era, especially in the social media era, let alone the Dallas Cowboys, and let alone when you are in the middle of a 30-year drought of reaching the NFC Championship game, and let alone when you have a lifetime playoff record of just 2-5, with one of those playoff wins coming over a team that finished 8-9 in the regular season, which was the 2022 Buccaneers if you were wondering. Now, it would be ignorant to look at Dak Prescott's body of work in 2023 and say he had a horrible season. He did a lot of things right. Hell, he finished second in MVP voting for that matter. Dak led the league in passing touchdowns last year as he would go on to throw 36 during the 2023 regular season, and he even had four passing touchdown games. And for anyone wondering, that's actually double what Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes had combined, as they only had 1 4 passing touchdown game each. But for as good as Dak looks at times, and hell, even spans of seasons, he uncharacteristically plays bad at the worst times, almost like no other quarterback we've ever seen. For reference, the Cowboys started the year 3-1 last year as they had a slip-up game in Week 3 against the Cardinals. Oh well, it happens. But they responded by dominating the Patriots as they won by 35 points, which set them up for a highly anticipated game against the 49ers on Sunday night in Week 5. How did Dak play? Well, he finished with 153 yards and 3 interceptions as the Cowboys lost by 32 points. But Dak's next 8 games were spectacular, and I truly mean that. He had one of the best, if not the best, 8-game stretch of his entire career. He would go on to average over 300 yards passing per game, and threw 23 touchdowns to just 2 interceptions, and the Cowboys went 7-1 during this stretch. Their only loss was a 5-point loss in Philly in Week 8, which they would avenge as they would go on to beat them by 20 points in Week 14, in a game Dak would throw for 271 yards and 2 touchdowns. But then came the game in Buffalo where Dallas's rushing defense was absolutely gashed to the tune of 266 yards and 3 touchdowns, and they lost by 21 points on the road. In that game, Dak threw for just 134 yards and the Cowboys were embarrassed. They would go on to win the NFC East, and then came the most embarrassing game of them all, when Dallas was humiliated by Green Bay at home in the wild card round of the playoffs. Now, Dak's stat line looked solid from that game, as he threw for over 400 yards and 3 touchdowns, and even completed 41 passes. But this was a true watch the game rather than look at the box score, and it was not pretty. This was after a year in which Dallas led the league in scoring, and Dak, and the defense too for that matter, wet their pants when it mattered most. And Prescott is now in a contract year, and the future for him in Dallas is uncertain. Unfortunately for Dak, the narrative around him won't stop until he wins multiple big games. The reality is they can and probably will get to the postseason this year, but how will Dak perform when it matters most? Now, from Dallas to the Big Apple we go to discuss Aaron Rodgers of the New York Jets. Despite everyone always getting their jokes in about the Jets losing and how Jets is actually an acronym for just end the season, the Jets have a very, very good roster and they can seriously compete if they have quarterback production. Not surprisingly, when you're quarterbacked by Zach Wilson, Trevor Siemian, and Tim Boyle, you're not going to receive great production, and there was a reason the Jets finished 29th in points per game last year. It was a truly unfortunate season for New York because of all of the hype from the summer that led into opening night against the Bills. But then the unthinkable happened. Aaron Rodgers' season was over just 4 plays in, and aside from the come-from-behind walk-off punt return touchdown win against the Bills, the Jets' season was over that night. The last time this franchise made the playoffs was all the way back in 2010, and when you think of what this franchise has been through since then, not just because of Sam Darnold and Zach Wilson, but because of other first-round picks like Quentin Coples or Dee Milner, or you name it, this franchise has been waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. And when they traded for a 4-time league MVP, well, simply put, the anticipation entering 2023 was unreal. This franchise has spent top 5 picks over the past 15 years on guys like Mark Sanchez, Sam Darnold, and Zach Wilson, and that also doesn't include other first-round picks like Dee Milner, for example, or like Quentin Coples, for example. So to say the hype for the Jets fan base was unprecedented entering the 2023 season, especially after a preseason game against the Giants, in which they saw 2022 Offensive Rookie of the Year Garrett Wilson, and a player that looks to be their wide receiver 1 of not just 2024, but for the next several years, hell, even to the next decade, yeah, Jets fans were excited to say the least. Oh, and this is also in New York City, a city that has a metro population of nearly 20 million people, and when you factor in how much Aaron Rodgers loves talking to the media and how much he loves getting people going, there's a lot of pressure on Rodgers entering 2024 to say the least. The Jets gave up everything they gave up to get him for a Super Bowl. They didn't give up everything they gave up for a wild card exit or a single playoff win during the Aaron Rodgers era. Aaron, the Jets fans, the Jets team, the coaches, everyone knows for the New York Jets entering 2024, it is Super Bowl or bust. Now, from the Big Apple to the Sunshine State we go to discuss Trevor Lawrence. Trevor has had an up and down career through the first 3 years of his career, which is a pretty big understatement. 2021 was a nightmare, as the Urban Meyer experiment predictably went bad, and there was concern that the Jags may have ruined one of the best quarterback prospects we've seen this century. But 2022 finished pretty good after a tough start, which led us into 2023, which was increased expectations, and the hope Trevor could throw for 4,500 yards and 30 touchdowns, and that he could take the next step as a player. Unfortunately, he never took the next step this past year, and there are times on tape where Trevor still makes very poor decisions. Whenever there's a player like Trevor, fair or not, especially early in his career, but when a prospect with as much hype as Trevor had, makes a good play, or has a good game and leads a game-winning drive or anything positive like this, it's going to get heavily discussed by the national media, and there's going to be a lot of noise around it. That's how it goes, and it will be much of the same if or when Caleb Williams has a good game or makes plays this year. Whether Trevor was throwing passes to Calvin Ridley, Justin Jefferson, or Jerry Rice, or whoever, there were plenty of times on tape where there were flat-out reckless throws that have to be worked on as he goes into year 4. Him throwing 14 interceptions in 2023 was not an accident, and you can very easily make a case that it should have been more. What also isn't ideal for Trevor is the Texans becoming the true darlings of the NFL, and CJ Stroud having the year he had last year, and the Colts of course having Anthony Richardson, and the Titans potentially having their guy in Will Levis too. We will soon do a video on the AFC South, kind of like we just did on the NFC North, which I recommend checking out by the way, but very quickly this division became very, very interesting, and things change very fast in the NFL, and believe it or not, the once phenom prospect who won a national championship as a teenager at Clemson is almost exiting the rookie contract window, and it's almost time to pay him north of $50 million per year. And hell, teams pay players based on what they're going to do, so it wouldn't surprise me at all if Trevor's agents tried to get him $55 million plus per year. But the on-field play certainly hasn't warranted a $55 million per year contract, and this all plays into why Trevor is under a lot of pressure entering 2024. Whether you think Trevor can be a truly elite quarterback in the next few years, or you think he will remain where he is, the reality for Trevor specifically is you can make a case for either side, but the next 4 or 5 years of his career, really right around until he's around age 30, really rely on his 2024 season. Two honorable mention players I wanted to bring up are Deshaun Watson of the Browns, for obvious reasons, as Cleveland traded 3 first-round picks for him, and in 12 games with the Browns, he's thrown 14 touchdowns to 9 interceptions, while completing passes at an 8% less rate than he did in Houston. Kirk Cousins, of course, is another because of the big contract he signed in free agency with Atlanta, while they also drafted Washington quarterback Michael Penix. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please like and subscribe, as only about 35% of people watching are subscribed, and it helps the channel tremendously. Until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.